Welcome to the Football365 Isolation Show. I'm your host, Mark Smith, and I'm joined by the assistant editor of Football365.com, Matt Stead. Matt Stead, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark. I've had a haircut. I think we've both got a bit too much hair, to be honest. So I thought I'd take the load off.
Let's not complain about it, though. There are a lot of bold people who will be very angry at us doing that. Jealousy is a fickle mistress. Quickly then, into the mails. We've got quite a Timo Werner-centric mailbox today, with the news very recently breaking that it looks like Chelsea are about to sign Timo Werner. We've had some instant reaction from the mailbox. Mikey, who's a Chelsea fan, says, I never expected to be writing in today about Chelsea signing Timo Werner. Honestly dumbstruck in a positive way. As many thought, and I'd argue expected, he was off to Liverpool or staying in Germany this summer. So this huge development is certainly out of the blue. He could easily be our striker for the next 5, 6, 7+ years. Big shout. An incredible goal scorer we need. This summer so far, along with the early signing of Hakim Ziyech, reminds me very much of the summer we bought in Diego Costa and Cesc Fabregas. 2 early signings, 2 top-class signings, and we all know what happened that season. Maybe, just maybe, Chelsea can challenge Liverpool and City for the title next season. I stress maybe. Either way, I'm excited for our future at Stamford Bridge. Unpack that then. Mikey, Chelsea fan, feels very strongly that this could be the start of something under Frank Lampard. What are your take? What are your thoughts on this?
It's certainly a very good sign. I think it's a decent barometer of a player if Liverpool want him. If the only problem that Liverpool had is that they can't afford him, then clearly Chelsea they've got the means to do it, and I think they've got the squad that he would fit in absolutely perfectly. I know Tammy Abraham is a good player, and I think there's probably a suggestion that he could play alongside Werner, but Werner's definitely the better striker. He can fit into that squad well. Like he says, he can probably stay there for a good 5 or so years. I think it's a 5-year contract he's got. Mm-hmm. So I think Chelsea, they'll get a good half a decade or so out of him. I think I don't know if it's, in terms of a signing, I don't know if he's good enough to make them challengers to Liverpool and City, but It depends if they can get some more players in. I think they're off the bench real well. If they get a good left back in, if they can improve that defence, and I think the other question is Frank Lampard, whether he's on the same level as Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. It's difficult to say at the minute.
Yeah, of course.
It might be, eventually it might get to that stage, but whether that's a case of it happening in a couple of years, I'm not really sure, to be honest.
Are we not jumping the gun a little bit here, though, Matt? I mean, he's been outstanding this season, and he was good last season, but to suddenly be saying, well, the next 7 years are sorted then, is Mikey there not getting a bit overexcited? We've seen a lot of players with more hype behind them than Timo Werner come over here and, struggle, quite frankly. So it's not a dead cert, is it?
No, there's no guarantee. We've seen, like you say, players come from all sorts of different countries, all sorts of different leagues where they've been scoring goals like left, right and centre, and then they come to the Premier League, or they come to it's even any other different league. If Barcelona sign a player, he might struggle in the league. It's a case of whether they struggle with the culture and the lifestyle there, and they might just not mesh with the style of play. So I don't know. There is no guarantee that he'll fit in well. It does seem like a natural fit, but I think
Yeah, I agree. He does seem like a natural fit, and I also think that culturally, England and Germany are not that far apart. The climate's quite similar. It's not as much of an upheaval as it would be coming from, South America, for example, where we see a lot of players traditionally struggle. You mentioned there Tammy Abraham. Now, he seems to be the big loser in all of this. And here's a guy who had a great season out on loan the year before this, has had a fantastic first Premier League season, or certainly first Premier League season for Chelsea. And it looks like he's been usurped already to a guy who's only a bit younger than him. I mean, it shows. Daniel Storey wrote a really good article about this a few days ago. It just shows how difficult it is for academy players to break through. And Tammy Abraham, who's broken through and done superbly well and on the cusp of an England, Euro place, that's obviously gone by the wayside now. But all of a sudden, he'd now be number 2, maybe even number 3 in the pecking order at Chelsea.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I've never heard of Daniel Storey for a start. I've got no idea who he is. Aside from that, in terms of Abraham, I think that's just the nature of football, really. I think he got his chance at Chelsea because they couldn't sign any players, because Lampard kind of had this free hit of a season where he could bring the youth in. Chelsea obviously have struggled kind of bring that kind of player through since John Terry and Frank Lampard. Obviously, Lampard came from West Ham, but it's that kind of giving
Yeah.
younger players a proper chance in the first team as opposed to signing them ready-made from elsewhere. So I think it's just the nature of the beast, really. I think
Yeah, I agree.
it's harsh on Abraham because especially at the start of the season, he was like prolific. He did as much as you could probably ask of him, to be honest. But I think
Definitely.
in terms of Werner, he's a seasoned international. He's got more Champions League experience. I think he's more proven, less proven in the Premier League, but I think that's just the nature of it, really.
Yeah. I do feel as though now we're going to see Frank Lampard scrutinised a lot more than he was at the start of this season, mainly because of the transfer window. I mean, when you haven't got a transfer window to contend with and you're not judged on transfers, it's sort of win-win, isn't it? Because you can bring through the players, and if they do well, congratulations, Frank. But now the transfer window and the players he signs can be used as a stick to beat him with, as it is for every other manager in the world. So now I think we're going to see just how good Lampard is at that side of football management.
Yeah, definitely. And he had the safety net as well of kind of replacing Sarri, who he won the Europa League. He finished third. He had a brilliant debut.
On paper, great season.
Yeah, exactly. For a first season as a manager in England, you can't really argue with that. But he was never overly popular with the fans. He had a difficult style of play to kind of implement. He wasn't backed that well in the transfer window, really. I think he only signed, I think it was only one outfield player. He signed Kepa, obviously, for a ridiculous amount of money, but I wouldn't have thought that was his decision. But yeah, I think in terms of Lampard, he's certainly this first season he's benefited from replacing Sarri. Like you say, he's benefited from that safety net of not having any signings to be scrutinised on. He's had a bit of free reign in terms of playing the youngsters, which it gets a lot of goodwill in terms of the media, in terms of the fans, in terms of Abramovich. But then, yeah, you've got a problem once you do start making signings. If they go badly, then you've got no one else to blame, really. It does follow the manager's rule.
Let's move on to the other side of this Timo Werner coin. Minty, who is a Liverpool fan, his email is titled, "Didn't fancy him anyway." It says, "Twitter seems to be melting down because Werner looks like he's on his way to Chelsea. We signed nobody last summer, and now we're 25 points clear at the top of the league. It's weird how quickly the 12-year-olds on there forget that. We currently have the best goalkeeper, right back, centre back, left back, defensive mid, and 2 wide forwards in the league, give or take. That's 7 of 11 players who are arguably top of their game and very tough to improve upon. We don't strictly need to buy in our improvements. Harvey Elliott looks promising, and hopefully him and Brewster will keep the pressure on the forward players next season. Gomez could stay injury-free and become the second best centre-back in the league. The future is pretty bright, I think, no matter who we sign, unless this all means we are signing Mbappe, of course." First of all, yes or no, are they signing Mbappe?
No.
No, okay, sadly not. But Liverpool, Minty there, the Liverpool fan, has got a point there, hasn't he? This is a bigger signing for Chelsea than it would have been for Liverpool. It doesn't feel like they're struggling. It doesn't feel like they're desperately needing someone like Werner, does it?
Not particularly, no. Chelsea definitely need him more, whereas Liverpool, you kind of look at that front three. I read an article on The Athletic earlier. It was a case of Werner being a substitute until January 2021, when theoretically the Africa Cup of Nations will be held.
Right, yeah.
And obviously there they'd lose Mane, they'd lose Salah, and then they'd have a chance to kind of give him more opportunities, Werner, to play, properly blood him into the first team. So I think that obviously that's changed with everything that's going on. So I think the need for that was kind of reduced. But I don't know, you do kind of look at it and think Liverpool have had this brilliant season on the back of a summer where they signed 2 teenagers and they signed 2 backup goalkeepers. So they didn't really make any much of an improvement to the first team. They kind of kept the core of players that had won the Champions League, come so close in the Premier League. And they've benefited from that. I don't know whether they can kind of capture that lightning in a bottle twice for a second season. It's always a difficult kind of balance to strike.
Yeah, it's hard to it's clear that continuity can be a really positive thing, but at the same time, you're treading a fine line between continuity and letting players go stale and losing out on that churn that we talked about when Poch left Spurs. He wasn't able to get the churn of players that he wanted to keep things fresh and keep players hungry. So, I mean, time will tell. I think Werner will be a hit. I don't think Liverpool will miss signing him too much, and I'm sure they've got someone else lined up. Right, last week, Steady, we had our overrated five-a-side team. So it stands to reason that this week we should have our underrated five-a-side team. We've only got about 5 minutes or so we'll try and rattle through this. you want to go ahead with your first choice for your underrated five-a-side?
Of course, I'll go for a goalkeeper. I'll keep it traditional. I'll go for David James.
Now, why is he underrated?
I think that because when you think of David James, he's very much this. It's the Calamity James kind of moniker that he got riddled with throughout his playing career. But he's kept the second most clean sheets in Premier League history. I know he played about 2,000 games to get that, which kind of it stands. It's the law of averages. You will keep a few clean sheets, but I think he deserves a better reputation, I think, in terms of his goalkeeping. So, like, even towards the end of his career at Portsmouth, I remember him there. He was absolutely brilliant there.
Yeah, absolutely. My main thing with David James is the off-field stuff. He was such a good-looking guy. He was doing like catwalk modeling in Milan. Then he had the whole thing with being addicted to his Nintendo, was it, or PlayStation? And he put that down as a reason for those mistakes. But you're right. I am so wrong to remember him for that, because he was actually an outstanding keeper. And had it not been for the keepers of his generation, he would have been England's number one there for quite a long time, I think. We just had a very good crop of goalkeepers. I've gone for Shay Given as my underrated goalkeeper. He's a player that never really gets mentioned when you talk about Premier League legends, I think. I mean, maybe because he's relatively diminutive in stature. He's not one of those 6'3", 6'4" lads that we all know. He's someone who is just genuinely cat-like between the sticks. 134 caps for Ireland, 489 appearances in the Premier League. That's longevity. That's got to count for something. So Shay Given is my underrated goalkeeper. Let's move on. Who have you got at the centre-back position? Or maybe you haven't got a centre-back. Maybe you just got a different defender.
I've not got a centre-back now. I'm going to keep it Irish, and I'm going to go for Dennis Irwin, who is kind of in a similar vein to Shay Given. I think he's that dependable, reliable kind of player who he'll put in a 7 or 8 out of 10 performance every single week. You can probably count the amount of mistakes he makes on one hand. But that kind of, I think people fall in love with the more maverick kind of players who can win a match one week and then the next week they'll make about 10 mistakes and then lose it. Whereas
I think this is what's
so reliable.
This is going to be a theme, I think, during this whole conversation, because underrated players are the ones that, like you say, are a bit under the radar. It's they're not putting off flash tricks and they're not doing, the things that get you on a highlight reel. But what they are is dependable and steady and, just high quality, like you say, 7 or 8 out of 10 every week. So I think we'll see that as a theme throughout. I mean, my next choice, in fact, no, it's the choice after the next one, is absolutely peak that. So we'll see. Anyway, my centre-back, Ledley King. I feel like he's one of the best centre-backs the Premier League has had in terms of ability, in terms of talent and leadership. I think he gets underrated because he was just ravaged by injuries from quite a young age. And we never got to see him play for 5 seasons in a row. 35 games a season or whatever.
Yeah,
and I feel like he's never.
It's that kind of talent. He had that ability, but we never. I think the shame is that we never saw how good he could be, especially for like England. Because if you look at the centre halves we've had John Terry, Rio Ferdinand, Sol Campbell, players like that. You could theoretically think that King would be alongside them.
Oh yeah, he'd be in that list. Had it not been for injuries, he'd be very much in that list, and there would be no argument. But injuries is part of football, I suppose. I'll go next because this is the player I was referring to a moment ago. There's a good chance I'll get pelters for this. Gareth Barry is in my underrated team. Why are you? All right, then go on. And why are you laughing?
Well, I don't know really. I think it's the same. It is very much the theme, isn't it? It's the kind of under the radar, reliable players. But I don't know what you do.
He was a specialist, way ahead of his time. He was someone he'd sit in front of the back four, he'd keep things nice and simple. He played over 10 million times in the Premier League. Would you believe?
That's
something like that.
Yeah.
I think he's got the record, hasn't he, for the amount of apperances? He's got 653 Premier League appearances, that's more than Ryan Giggs. I mean, that's astonishing. And you've got to think that these football managers, by and large, must know football better than I do, better than you do. And yet, time after time, those managers would always pick him. It wasn't like he was just one manager's darling player. Every single time a manager came in, he'd be the first name on the team sheet, and he'd inevitably be captain. And that's got to stand for something.
Yeah, Rafa Benitez was absolutely obsessed with them as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Begin that, isn't it?
And he knows what he's talking about. Right, who have you got next?
I've gone for Steve McManaman next.
Galactico. You've gone for him as underrated.
Very much so, yeah. I think it's more in terms of, well, even the Real Madrid thing, I think that's kind of overlooked in terms of how brave that was to go, because he was one of the first real high-profile Premier League Bosman signings.
Yeah.
And he was kind of given pelters for leaving Liverpool at his peak age and leaving them with no kind of transfer fee. But I think in terms of what he did for Liverpool, in that it was a bit of an underwhelming side, really, a transitional team. But he was producing the kind of numbers that nowadays, like players like Kevin De Bruyne would probably be happy with, players like that. I think he was very much kind of ahead of his time in terms of his versatility. He was obviously a wider player, but Liverpool started to use him more central at times, and I think that would, especially like in Klopp's team right at the minute, he'd be an absolutely perfect player.
He would, yeah. Also, worth pointing out, great hair and a great little diversion of he'll point one way, pass the other. Such a simple little trick. Do it 10 times a game. I used to love it. Right, I've gone for Leon Osman as my second midfielder. I'm a Derby County fan. We had him on loan at Derby for a season. He was absolutely fantastic. Then when he went back to Everton and started playing more regularly, he felt like a player that would be more at home on the continent. He was small in stature, but he was tricky. He had a great final ball. He popped up with a goal or two. Yeah, I thought he was fantastic. And he never really gets mentioned. He was the reason why Wayne Rooney was scoring all those millions of goals in youth football. That and the fact that Wayne Rooney's, one of the best ever players we produced. But
good, wasn't he? Yeah.
Osman was there doing it with him. Okay, who have you got next?
I've gone for Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank next. It was kind of, when you discuss the Premier League legendary strikers, you kind of go through Alan Shearer, you go through Thierry Henry, Van Nistelrooy, Michael Owen, Robbie Fowler, or players like that. Whereas Hasselbank never really, in terms of what I've seen, he never really comes into that kind of conversation. But he absolutely should be in there, because for a couple of seasons at Leeds, he was absolutely brilliant. I think it was 4 or 5 seasons at Chelsea. Again, brilliant. I think in terms of those two clubs, he was top scorer for all but one season. I think it was the last season at Chelsea, where he was pretty much top scorer there. And his last season at Chelsea was when Abramovich came in. He was kind of on the periphery a bit more. So he was very much kind of that kind of player who didn't have many weaknesses, if any. He
just didn't want to move, though, Matt. He just didn't want to move. He needed the ball exactly where he wanted it, and if it didn't come to him, he wasn't running. That's what that's why people didn't like him for a time at least. I remember Chelsea fans being like that.
Yeah, you're underrating him now, Mark, and I'm
gone against the spirit of the game.
You've just picked a midfield of Leon Osman and Gareth Barry.
And I stand by it. It's the correct midfield. My final player in this is Olivier Giroud. Now, Giroud has had a great career at Arsenal, now doing things at Chelsea again. Looks like he's staying there for a bit longer as well. This is a man who's a World Cup winner, who led the line for France during the World Cup. All right, didn't score any goals. But we've talked about this before. It's not all about that. He's someone who facilitates other players around him. And I think that's probably the reason why he gets underrated. I mean, we talked about highlights reels earlier. Giroud's highlight reel is unreal. It's absolutely unbelievable. He's got scorpion kicks, he's got bicycle kicks, he's got 30 yard, he's got everything. He's absolutely got to be in that top 5. Who have you gone for?
I've gone for Roy Mackay, who is he's just, I think he's the scorer of the fastest ever Champions League goal. He kind of helped win Deportivo La Liga back in the day. I think he won the European Golden Shoe as well in 2003, at the time when kind of Thierry Henry was banging goals in. Ruud van Nistelrooy was rivaling him in the Premier League. But Mackay is kind of, it's that same thing where he's that dependability. I think he had 14 seasons in Europe, and for 11 of them he got at least double figures, which is, when you say he didn't really play for elite clubs, he had a spell at Bayern, but that was kind of during their time as, again,
how much of it is down to his name being maybe the least sexy name for a European striker? Roy Mackay should be in Coronation Street.
Yeah, I think, when you consider your choice of Olivier Giroud, which is kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Just saying it. Or Gareth Barry. All sounds good. Right, they are our 5-a-side picks. If you agree with them, if you disagree with them, get in touch with us at the editor at football365.com. Until next time, thank you, Matt Stead.
Thank you.
We'll be back this time next week. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.